We are live and streaming across the province of Ontario. Welcome to the 2022 FEO Energize virtual conference. Tuesdays and Thursdays in the month of March. 25 plus speakers. Dozens of important topics. Designed to motivate and inspire you to make a triumphant return from COVID. It's time to reconnect, reimagine, and refocus. Let's get energized. This portion of the 2022 FEO Energize Conference is brought to you by the Province of Ontario, Destination Ontario, OLG, and SmartServe Ontario. Please welcome our host for the 2022 FEO Energize Virtual Conference. It's our CEO, Dave McNeil.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to a busy Thursday. We've got an action-packed lineup for you here. At this time, we'd also like to thank Ann Barker and her team at Ticket Pro for everything they do for us with our conference, our membership drive, and anything else that we need, ticketed event we need. We can always count on Ticket Pro as a trusted partner. Thank you, Ann. Well, let's get right into it. We've got a busy day, as I said, and our first guest is no stranger to most of us in the room. Janet Sellery has been with us on several podcasts and Tuesday Talks as we've worked our way through the pandemic, and she's been a great resource to us. Since 2020, the pandemic has taken a lot of our focus, and now it's time to turn our focus back to other aspects of event safety. Janet Sellery will review new guidance and resources to help you power up your health and safety programs for a brand new event season. She'll also introduce you to Event Safety Alliance Canada and the Global Crowd Management Alliance. Janet, welcome, and please update your bio and what you're all about, and then right into the presentation.
And I'll jump right in. And Dave, I'm hoping that we'll be able to have some Q&A at the end so people can gather up their questions, probably pop them in the chat, or when we get to that moment, you can decide if people want to speak live or however you'd like it to go. It's fine with me. So I'm going to take a second now and just share my screen through the magic of Zoomery. And I want to start out with a very quick disclaimer, which will be familiar to many of you, that this is for information only. I'm Janet, and my pronouns are she and her, and I'm joining you from Stratford, Ontario, the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties, and we thank all the generations of people who have taken care of this land. Here's a little bit of my background. I'm originally a theater stage manager. I spent a great deal of my career at the Stratford Festival, both in stage management and as health and safety coordinator and subsequently manager. Since 2009, I've been doing occupational health and safety consulting, specializing in the arts, entertainment, and live events. I do a lot of volunteer work involving our sector, everything from a long-time volunteer role with the Ontario Ministry of Labour Advisory Committee for Live Performance. Since last June, I've been taking a lead with the Scott Johnson Working Group as we work towards fulfilling some of the recommendations of the coroner's inquest, which was looking into the death of Scott Johnson at the Downsview Radiohead concert in June of 2012. I'm the board chair for Event Safety Alliance Canada, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about what we're up to. I'm on the board at the Event Safety Alliance, and I participate in the Event Safety Working Group. Before I get started with content, I'd like to take a second to recognize the really great work of Dave, Debbie, Jay, and the whole team at FEO. I'm sure for all of us who are on this call, you can recognize how very, very effectively. FEO stepped up to engage in advocacy on the behalf of this sector, and also to create innovative networking and programming opportunities. So I've certainly really enjoyed seeing FEO and a lot of other arts service organizations absolutely blossom in this incredibly difficult time that we're all coming out of. So after 2 years of focusing on health and all of those COVID-19 protocols, we're heading into spring and a new beginning, which will include lots of exciting events. So now it's time to return our focus to safety. And I'd like to start just by taking you through some of the things that need to be, that you need to keep in mind as you go about doing your safety planning for your next event. Much of this will be familiar, but I think perhaps a few of the health and safety manuals might be a little dusty, as there's been a real reduction in, doing large in-person events. So I'm going to give a little bit of a review, and then I'm going to jump into sharing a bunch of resources that you're going to find quite helpful. And for the most part, they're free resources, which I'm a big fan of. So everyone who is in a senior role, certainly as an employer, needs to be certain that they are carrying out due diligence activities. And this begins in your planning phase. So as soon as you start thinking about doing an event, you need to identify if there is a constructor, and if so, who is it? It will either be an owner of a venue, or it could be an employer. And additional requirements apply to those folks. It's also possible to contract out the role of the constructor. So if you have a venue and you're bringing a gigantic event in, you could arrange a contract with the person who is bringing in that event. There's a lot of complexity about that, and there are some guidelines on the Ministry of Labor website to help you work that out. First and foremost, though, you need to identify who owns health and safety and spell it out in your contracts. And you need to identify all the hazards and address them for your specific event. There's a few things that'll happen in your pre-production phase. A lot of them have to do with communication and documentation. So you need to communicate expectations. And this means that you expect everyone working on your event is going to comply with legislation, be aware of site-specific hazards, ensure there's competent supervision on the site, workers are trained, and personal protective equipment is in use. And here we're going beyond the, we've all become familiar with PPE as being masks and respirators and face shields, and goggles, gloves during this pandemic period. But now we're really needing to get back into thinking about safety shoes, safety vests, hard hats, fall protection, and that type of PPE. When you're working with contractors, you need to identify documentation requirements, things like ensuring that they have WSIB, Workplace Safety and Insurance Board clearance, which is essentially ensuring that they've paid up their premiums and that their workers will be covered for workers' compensation while they're on your site. You want to check that they have adequate insurance by requesting a certificate of insurance. You need to make sure that your policies and procedures are up to date, that you're gathering and making sure that you have on site. Each of your workers should have their training certificates and records. And make sure that you check that there are equipment pre-use inspection checklists if you'll be using equipment like elevating platforms, scissor lifts, personnel lifts, forklifts, anything that has a requirement to be inspected with a written checklist before use. Think about the training that your people are going to need to be on site. First of all, every worker in Ontario needs to complete health and safety awareness for workers and supervisors. There are 2 different modules on the Ministry of Labor website, and they're free. Those have been in place for some time, so you can expect most people will already have completed it. You just need to confirm by making sure you've got a copy of their certificate. You'll need to provide everyone with a health and safety orientation that is relevant to the work they do. It may be something quite, maybe a couple hours or a half a day if you're doing a really huge event. You may have more orientation for your supervisors. You may be able to do something quite short for many of the workers, maybe 15, 20 minutes. Anyone who will work with hazardous materials, which would include solvents, fuels, cleaning products, any of that kind of stuff, will need to have WMIS training, which is should be current within 3 years. It's not required to be done that often, but that's what I recommend for my clients. Anyone who will work at heights needs to have a certificate of working at heights training. Plus, there will be some additional training depending on the specific hazards at your workplace: forklift, elevating work platforms, propane handling, and so on. Some of your people may need to have specific licenses or certifications. For example, if you will have an electrician on site. First aid training, you need to have people who have first aid training throughout the project, everything from your load in through to your setup and build, event time, tear down, load out. There needs to be someone on hand who is trained in first aid. You may be hiring event medical team to provide first aid during your event, but make sure you're not overlooking the fact that you need to have first aid training and supplies available during your in and your out as well. You need to have clear emergency response and evacuation procedures, and these will be specific to the nature of your event. It may be for fire, power outage. You may need to, if you're outdoors, you're going to need to deal with severe weather. So lots of things just to make sure that people are trained on before you find yourself in a difficult situation. So paperwork, does this sound like a lot of paperwork? Yes, it does. Hardly surprising from a former stage manager, but there's a lot of importance behind that paperwork. First and foremost, it's about confirming that everyone understands their responsibilities and liability. And it gives you an opportunity to identify and resolve any gaps before you go to site. Keep in mind that a Ministry of Labor inspector can require documentation and shut you down until you provide it. In case of an incident, you will need to prove that you took every precaution reasonable in the circumstances for the protection of the workers. And that's a section that's found for both employers and supervisors under the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So once you're on site and you're up and running, there are some ongoing activities that need to be carried out, coordinating the activities of contractors and workers. Now that's going to be important for efficiency and for just executing your event on time, but it also is hugely protective in terms of health and safety when the site is moving smoothly and everyone knows where everyone's going to be and what they'll be doing. Provide an orientation for every worker and volunteer on the site, and organize and operate your site to minimize hazards. Make sure if there is a hazard that it's clearly marked and people are aware of it. Respond to day-to-day issues throughout the project and ensure compliance with safety requirements. Conduct daily workplace inspections and address identified hazards. So that could be a supervisor who's doing a walkabout and just really looking to make sure that, that perhaps two different teams haven't somehow inadvertently created something that could be unsafe. Sometimes if one team doesn't know what the other team is doing, they can, there can be problems in that way. And then raise and resolve safety concerns at daily team meetings. So whenever you're discussing the progress of the event, health and safety needs to be a component of that conversation. So some of you may be feeling like, whoa, it's been a while since I had to deal with all that. So next I want to transition into talking about some places where you can find support and resources to help you formalize your health and safety and be ready to address challenges as they arrive. So in Ontario, we have a number of safe work associations, and the one that is sort of more focused on our sector is the Workplace Safety and Prevention Services. They have a great number of free resources on their website. So sorry, I'm just reading a note that I made. So this is the kind of information that will kind of take us back to basics so we can review the foundational elements of the health and safety program. And these are elements that every company requires, whether or not they're working in the event space. So I'm providing to FEO a resource list that will give you the links to get to these resources. But WSPS has a part of their website which is called the Small Business Center, and they have a program called the Safety Roadmap. Now, don't be dissuaded by the number small. That's sure they have things divided into 1 to 5 workers and going on up. I find it really valuable regardless of the size of the organization. Most of us aren't working in, a gigantic factory where we need more than this. And I find that their resources are quite relevant. They're not event specific, but what you can do is when you go to that website, you'll find a safety checklist, and it says, do you have this? Have you posted that? Do you have a process for reporting injuries? So it's a quick way, it's just a few pages long, quick way to go, okay, yep, that's in place, yep. Oh, wait a minute, we need to look at that. They've got a section about duties and responsibilities, as well as posting requirements. There are certain documents that need to be posted at the worksite, and whether that means that you have a bulletin board in your site trailer, or I've even had people who have attached the information to a piece of foam core and set it up backstage. There are posting requirements that every site needs. You may find you have a way that you can also put that information onto a company intranet or some way that people can access it electronically. You need to have a policy on workplace violence and harassment, so there are resources there. And there's a section about workplace hazards. It may not get into all of the hazards you need to consider, but it's going to be a very good start. They've also got a link about training and orientation, followed by first aid, injury reporting, and return to work. Return to work is about returning someone to work following an injury. So hopefully that's never going to be an issue for you. Especially with a very short event, there may not be a way to return someone back into that event if it's a one-off, but have a look at that and see if it applies to your organization. So I do recommend the Safety Roadmap at WSPS as a really great place to start and just, look at the basics, look at those foundational elements to see where you're at. And next, I'm going to recommend having a look at some resources on the Public Services Health and Safety Association. So Public Services, this is, again, another safe work association which offers free resources. And this one is more focused on education, culture, things like healthcare, police, fire, ambulance. But one of the things I like about their resources is they have some quite good information for board members. So if you are perhaps a volunteer-led organization, it's really important to have an understanding about how you are going to, address the health and safety requirements and what your responsibilities are as a board member. So the first note is about a fact sheet, and it discusses the responsibilities and liabilities of the board with respect to compliance with the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And then just below that, you can see I've made a note about a free e-learning presentation they've got. It's only about 30 minutes long, and it introduces the idea of health and safety as one of many critical organizational risks that must be managed and mitigated through formal oversight and demonstrable due diligence. So I encourage you to have a look at those resources as well. Many of you will also have volunteers as part of your event, and there are some resources that are helpful in that regard. The Occupational Health and Safety Act typically does not cover volunteers, but there is an expectation that you will exercise a duty of care for your volunteers. And certainly if there is a critical injury, there is a reporting requirement to the Ministry of Labor for any person who is injured on a work site, and that would include volunteers. So one of the resources is called Health and Safety for Volunteers. Very short. It's a piece that's on the Ontario Ministry of Labor Training and Skills Development website. And then going back over to the Public Services Health and Safety Association, they have a free webinar that's 55 minutes long, and it covers workplace health and safety requirements for volunteers. So if that's part of your workforce, I encourage you to just go back and review what your obligations are towards those folks who are going to be part of your event. And another website that I highly recommend is the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety. So it's a national resource, and it has a huge range of information about health and safety that you can search. The resources on the site include legislation, hazards, information about workers, which includes things like young workers, aging workers, vulnerable workers. There are some terrific health and wellness resources, which get into things like psychological safety and stress. And then they've got some program resources about how to build a health and safety program. They also have an incredible series of OHS Answers fact sheets. So if you're looking for something like forklifts or gloves or table saws, they have individual fact sheets that are very clearly written, and they're very useful. They also have a huge series of e-courses. Many of them are free, so take a look. And there are some that are fairly reasonably priced, and they're of good quality. So I teach WMIS to folks in our sector, but if someone is looking for an online option for WMIS, this is the one that I recommend. Their WMIS for workers is really reasonably priced, and it's high quality. You need to be a little cautious about e-learning, because if you find something that's free, it can be, maybe incomplete, maybe not well explained. And but I have a lot of confidence in the CCOHS resources. And the other resource that I'm linking to on the resource list is a section which is called Working in Live Performance Theater. Now, I know not all of you are doing performances at your events. You may be, it may be a community festival, it may be a food festival or a sporting event, but have a look at this, because the nice thing it does is it makes a list of health and safety program elements with links. And these are ones that would be relevant to live performance, and I believe indeed relevant to the broader world of events. And then there's a very good list of links to specific hazards or risks that have been identified to be relevant to this sector. So again, with the exception of some of the e-courses, all of the information on this site is free, and there's quite a wealth of information there. So now I'm going to take you to a quick review for the safety guidelines for live performance industry in Ontario. This is the work of an advisory committee, which I've been part of for, I don't know, more than 15 years. I've lost track. And these are intended to be guidelines that will give detailed rules. They're created by experts and/or government, but in our case, primarily industry professionals. And the intent is to assist people in the industry to understand how some of the very specialized aspects of our industry, how we can best comply with the Ontario legislation. Keep in mind that they are not replacements for the laws. So if you look at something like the flame effects guideline or performer flying, if there is an injury or an incident, any orders or charges will go back to the Act and its regulations. But these guidelines do give very good, reasonable practices that will help you be compliant. So as I said, they're not enforceable on their own. The enforcement goes back to the laws, but they are quite valuable, partly for the people in the industry who are going to be doing some of these activities, but they're also useful for inspectors who may not have clue one about what it means to juggle flaming torches or fly above an audience. So that's, as long as you're using them as guidance, you have a much better chance of explaining to an inspector how you are keeping people safe. This is the list of the different types of guidelines that are available. The first one is the application of industrial and construction regulations. And that's a really important one because our industry, both of those regulations apply. So when we are doing our load in, fit up, set up, lighting hang, load out, tear down, strike, our work falls under the construction regulation. And when we're doing our, run of show, we're doing our performances and the actual event, we're under construction. So it's very important to be clear about those requirements and how they apply. There's a very general introduction to risk assessment for productions. And then the rest of them are very much kind of task or activity specific. Just to give you an update, the committee has been working very, very hard during the pandemic to review and update the guidelines. And just in the last couple of weeks, 14 updated guidelines have been submitted to the ministry for review. Part of what they asked us to do was to put them into a new format so that they will go up on the new ontario.ca website. And that's really led to a real opportunity to go back and review them very, very thoroughly. And we're really looking forward to getting those updates out. I mentioned earlier the Scott Johnson Working Group, and one of our main activities at the moment is the update of the Temporary Performance Event Structures Guideline. So there will be considerable information added to that one. I would think it's going to be a little bit longer. I don't know that it will be done before fall, but there's terrific progress being made. All right, so now I want to tell you about the Event Safety Alliance Canada. And I know some of you are familiar with our organization. It began as a sort of a passion project for me within my health and safety consulting business. I had been very much involved with the Event Safety Alliance in the US and wanted to bring that type of education to Canada. So as one of our silver linings during the pandemic, Event Safety Alliance Canada was incorporated as a not-for-profit in December of 2020. And during the ongoing pandemic, our board of directors has focused on 4 basic tasks. So for those of you who are in not-for-profit, you will understand these things. We have no paid staff, so it has been a very intense piece of work to formalize the organization. We have also recruited 8 additional board members who joined us in January. We've established board committees, and now we're finally getting our programming underway for 2022. So we will have our spring events on sale very soon. We're holding our conference in Calgary from May 9 to 11, and it will be a hybrid. So we will have an in-person event in Calgary over those 3 days. And we will also have a virtual version that will be available live. So it's not going to be something recorded, but a ticket will allow people to view all of the sessions from wherever they might be. We're also hosting 3 crowd safety workshops with Eric Stewart. And I know a number of your members have attended in the past. Eric Stewart is a phenomenal expert when it comes to crowd safety. And so we'll be doing one workshop in Calgary, followed by 2 workshops in Toronto. And those workshops are very limited in the number of participants. We generally don't go above 25 to 30, and they sell out quickly. So if these are events that are of interest to you, I would encourage you to sign up for our newsletter at our website, which is www.esacanada.ca, and you will receive the information when we're ready to go on sale. As you can imagine, we, as a no paid employee organization, we are working very hard to get that happening, and we hope it'll be ready soon. In addition to our conference and workshops, we're soon going to be launching our memberships and sponsorships, and we look forward to building collaborative relationships with related organizations so that we can share all the great things that all of our organizations are up to. So that's ESA Canada, and I hope that you will sign up for the newsletter and become involved when you can. And as I said, I've been involved with the Event Safety Alliance in the US for a very long time, and their conference, the Event Safety Summit, is on sale now. It's being held in Lititz, Pennsylvania, which means I'm going to be getting on an airplane and leaving the country for the first time in 2 years. It's a little stressful, but it's going to be a fabulous few days. They are offering it as well as an online event. So it runs from March 22nd to 24, and they're also doing some pre-conference sessions on rigging. Eric will be there to do crowd safety. And then Richard Cadena will be doing a couple of days on stage electrics. So the website for the Event Safety Insights newsletter is listed there, eventsafetyalliance.org. And I encourage you to view their website because they've now got quite a bit of information that is free. So the Event Safety Guide that was originally published in 2014 is now available for free. They started offering it for free at the beginning of the pandemic, and it really is an excellent basic primer that covers a lot of the aspects of safety in our sector. And the other things that are posted on that guidance tab are a series of ANSI standards. So ANSI is the American National Standards Institute, and there are now standards for crowd management, weather preparedness, fire safety, and special event structures. And these are all focused on event safety. So you can download those for free. Lots of great resources there. They also have podcasts. I've done a couple of them, which are quite interesting. And they offer other types of training as well, which you may want to explore. So that's another organization I recommend. And just to wrap up, I want to tell you about the Global Crowd Management Alliance. So this is another one of our chalk it up to silver linings, is that this is an organization that had been sort of talked about, but it was really the pause of the pandemic that allowed it to move forward. And the mission is to educate, advocate, and motivate. So it got its start back in the before times, November of 2019. That's a picture of Eric at the summit. And he made an announcement that Eric is also the chair of the United Kingdom Crowd Management Association, and Steve Edelman, who is the vice president of the Event Safety Alliance, they announced their intention to create an international partnership. And on the break, I said, so this is going to be the US and the UK. You know, why isn't it? It should be the North America Crowd Management Association. And finally, having had some time to let all the ideas marinate, in January of 2021, a working group was formed to create this as more of a global organization. So I'm one of the advisors from Canada, but we also have folks from Australia, New Zealand, and Ireland on the board. And I just got a message that they have, since this January, they've enrolled 150 members from 20 different countries. So that's really, really exciting. It's an organization of people who are keen to advance crowd management and security services. And, you know, we always kind of hope that an organization like this will become irrelevant because there will never be any problems related to crowds at events. Certainly in November, Astroworld kind of shook the industry, and we realize how very, very relevant crowd safety is, whether you're hosting a parade or a large music festival, you know, some kind of a community event, a fair. There are lots and lots of situations where we need to have a better understanding of how our crowds, you know, circulate and behave in these event situations. So the objectives of GCMA are to promote crowd management and safety practices, deliver learning opportunities for people who do work in this area, raise awareness about the behavioral science, so how people behave in crowds, represent the interests of members, and support diversity in the crowd management industry. They're offering a series of different membership categories to people who function in the crowd safety and crowd management sphere. And individual membership is open to individuals actively engaged in crowd safety. So I was one of the first members, which was pretty exciting. They're starting off by doing member webinars this year. It's interesting how we all became a lot more open to online educational content during the pandemic. And for us trying to do something that's global that will be accessible to people around the world, that online webinar format is really important. So the first webinar for members is this afternoon, and it's about writing an honest crowd management plan that actually works. And June will look at career versus stopgap. So this industry and event, many areas of the event world are suffering from challenges in recruiting and retaining workers. So that one will be focused on that area. September will explore the collaborative approach to crowd safety planning and management. And December will be, you know, a sort of more sports stadium kind of exploration of enforcement and interpretation. So they have lots of other information planned, tremendous resources, and you know, certainly gravity is the same everywhere. And this organization is envisioning a world where everyone can gather in any setting safely. So I think you'll find some interesting information on the website. They're also active on social media, and you're welcome to check it out. So at this point, I'm going to just give you my contact information. You can always find me at Sellery Health and Safety. And I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to Dave and a little Q&A.
Yeah, thanks very much, Janet. Lots of great information here. I'm going to start off with a couple of questions. Please, if you've got any questions you'd like to share or have Janet answer, pop them into the Q&A function on the app, and we'll be glad to share them. Janet, I've been quoting Peter Ashman a lot lately, and
Yes.
And your talk speaks to it as well. As you know, a lot of us that have been involved with different organizations for long periods of time, you know, you develop a certain amount of muscle memory as you go through your event. So last year we had this problem, we did this.
Yes.
But even those people now have not been doing full-on events for probably closer to 3 years by the time we get back into doing it. So there's a lot of dusting off that needs to be done.
Yes, there is. And certainly I know Peter and I are singing from the same song sheet. just in terms of, so we're planning this Event Safety Alliance Canada conference, and our last live conference was 2019 in the spring, so solid 3 years. And I'm going through all my typed up and handwritten notes, because there's all those details that you you kind of get. Each year you learn more. Now, I'm pretty good about jotting things down, but even, I have to go back and look at those notes and go, what did I mean? So I think be kind to yourselves and allow for more time in your planning, and go back to your notes and realize this is going to take longer, because we're going to be dealing with things that we haven't had to focus on in quite some time. Yeah.
Now, Janet, as of March 21st, the masking, the last remnant of COVID, is going to be eliminated, which I think at that point brings us back to where we used to be as far as responsibility. There's no additional, but I think COVID has taught us some valuable lessons that will live on in the event world. Can you speak to that meshing of the two circumstances?
Yeah, so I think, so COVID has been really interesting in that, certainly as a health and safety professional, the safety piece has really been the majority of the work I do. So it has really brought us back to the health piece. And I think that's valuable, because there have always been things that we should be thinking about, even things as basic as having sharps containers. So if you have people who are working with knives or needles, soy needles, if you're having, obviously, if you have a large music festival, there will be drug use. You need to provide safe places for people to put syringes. So we need to think about biohazards, even as it relates to someone comes to your festival and they need to take insulin while they're there. So I think we really have had an increase in understanding about our biohazardous infectious diseases, and hopefully those protocols will be maintained. We've all learned, and not just as safety people, we've all learned what personal protective equipment means. Like the wide world will recognize the words PPE. So hopefully that will lead to a greater comfort with looking at the whole vast world of PPE and what you need to be safely executing your work. So that's a big improvement. And another piece that there's a couple of sort of models that I think have become much more mainstream that are really helpful. One of them is the hierarchy of controls. So we've talked about that a lot in terms of COVID, and it's like this pyramid, and at the top you have the most effective controls for a hazard are elimination, and then you move down to substitution. There are engineering controls, physical controls to protect people, administrative controls, and personal protective equipment. So I think what the broader world, not just events, but all of us have now had exposure to that kind of risk control, hazard control model, which is incredibly valuable. So you can look at what the most effective precautions are to take for any hazard. And then the other one that has come into play has been that Swiss cheese model. So I bet we're going to have a lot of people who think, oh, wait a minute, I've seen that, where we have slices of Swiss cheese, which are all our different precautions. So with COVID, we know that it's not just hand sanitizer, it's not just plexiglass barriers, it's just masks, that we're looking at a series of precautions, and we can apply that to any of our safety hazards. We can make sure that we're doing training, that we've got safe equipment, that we're inspecting that equipment. So I think a lot of those things will stay. In terms of the specific COVID precautions, I'm probably going to be wearing a mask for longer than the government requires. It's become something that I feel comfortable with, and that I, if I'm in a crowd, I think I'm going to want it for probably at least a few months, perhaps longer. In terms of the vaccination certificates, the requirement is lifted, but I know of a number of organizations who have surveyed their members and their attendees, and there is still a desire to have, some people really want to know that they're in an audience of people who are vaccinated. They may want still to have some distancing. So that's going to be down to individual events and companies to look at the demographics of their audience and their audience preferences. So some of that may disappear immediately. Some of that, I know some theater companies, for example, have said they're going to maintain vaccination certificates until the end of April, and then they're going to revisit. So I would love to say, toss your masks, toss your hand sanitizer, it's over. But I think it's going to be a little more gradual. And I think we're going to have to be on guard for a bit longer.
Right. And that's what my next point was going to be, is that all of those sanctions might be lifted now, but for one more outbreak, they may start to come back in place. So it's really important that you still know what needs to be done at each of the different states.
Don't toss that paperwork. Put it in a nice file folder. Keep it in a folder on your computer. Would that you never have to look at it again, but we've seen such a range of restrictions coming and going. I wouldn't want to look in the crystal ball and say we're completely done.
And another thing you talked about, and it was right near the start of your presentation, was who owns it.
Yes.
Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because everybody really owns a certain part of the health and safety, but somebody has to be managing the overall.
Exactly.
Speak a little bit more to that.
Yeah, sure. So the role of the constructor is something that comes into play whenever there is a construction project. So that let's imagine a music festival event site. So on that event site, we're going to have someone who is the starting place. It may be a promoter. It may be a company that does this festival, and they will be the constructor, which means their responsibility extends to coordinating the safety of everyone on the site. So if you think about that busy music festival, you're probably going to have a number of contractors who come in. So you're going to have maybe staging and lighting and audio video. You might have people come in who, you're going to have your artists. You're going to bring some companies in who will do food and beverage. Each of those individual companies is an employer. Each of those companies has to have their own compliant health and safety program. But within the site, the constructor has to organize all of those people and has to be sure that every company they invite onto their site to work is going to be compliant. So some companies have been using this pandemic time to review their health and safety programs, to improve the training for their people, to sort out their documentation. And that's been really great because it's improved their level of professionalism. And when they're ready to jump back in, they will be that much better prepared. So who owns it? In a site where there are multiple employers, it will be the role of the constructor. In any other company, it's the employer. The employer carries the can. That is the person, that is the entity that is going to be found responsible if an injury or an incident takes place within the work that they're doing.
And you made another good point for all of us that use volunteers, and that's probably every single one of us, is that in that instance, we are the employer and they are technically our employees, even though they're not an employee, but it's important that flows over.
Exactly, because when we look at our health and safety program, we have to provide the same level of oversight, information, and training to a volunteer. There is, if we're having a volunteer in a place where there could be a risk of a head injury because of overhead work, we have to make sure that they understand that they cannot be below that work. They may need to have a hard hat or other types of PPE. We need to provide them with training. Now, so all of this needs to be proportional. So if you have volunteers who you are strictly going to be having check tickets perhaps, or provide direction to washrooms and food and bev, they need to know about the site. They need to know the hazards they could encounter. They need to know who to report an injury, an incident, or a hazard to. So who is their supervisor? And they need to understand what to do in case of an emergency. So if you have to do an evacuation, what are they supposed to do? Are they to listen to an announcement and direct people to the nearest exit? Are they supposed to go to a meeting place to be accounted for afterwards? So it's not that your volunteers need to know everything about your health and safety program, but they absolutely need to know enough to work safely in the role that they will be carrying out.
Now, speaking of the volunteer, do certificates that a volunteer might get at work, are they transferable into your organization, and how do you track that properly?
People do it in different ways. For the most part, what I find with volunteers is most organizations will pay people to do work that is hazardous. And that's wise. That's very, very wise. If you are going to have a volunteer using hazardous materials like fuel or solvents or something like that, you will check that they have WHMIS. And so if they have WHMIS from their workplace and it's within 3 years, that's great. You can accept that. I encourage people to get, to actually have those certificates on file. So have them email the certificate or take a photo of the certificate and then keep it in a folder or some kind, attach it to their, you might have a database of your volunteers, and you might attach those to the individual file for your volunteers, however you keep track of it. Or you could have an Excel spreadsheet with all the names and you tick off the date that they completed those types of training.
Yeah, and I think it's a good opportunity if you're doing your yearly check-in on volunteers and are they still engaged to update all of that personal information. So it's important to touch and follow up on that.
And you'll probably have things like a code of conduct. You'll probably have them sign off on a workplace violence and harassment policy or respectful workplace. So, making sure that everyone has the types of, that they understand the expectations on the site. That's really, really big.
You talked a little bit about severe weather and that process, and I know for a lot of us outdoors, it's really important. But that's also a conversation you need to have with your insurance provider, because in a lot of insurance policies, it lays out exactly what you do at each level. So there's really no room for negotiation.
Exactly, there is
through the stages, and
there's no room for freestyling there. So when it comes to severe weather, I really encourage you to look to that ANSI standard on weather preparedness, and also have one of the things that is even broader than weather is having a show-stop procedure. So understanding whether it's weather or fire or violence or crowd crush, you need to lay down a process for who is allowed to make that call. How is it going to happen? Is it going to be a PA announcement? Are you going to put it up on your LED screens? You may be in a situation where you can engage the artist to be involved in that show stop, but you need to know exactly that a lot of the delay and a lot of the catastrophes are about not having a clear understanding of who is going to make that call. This is one of the sessions that we will be including in the Event Safety Alliance Canada conference, because it's just so critical. When we saw anyone who's seen footage from Astroworld, even though we can't draw conclusions because the investigation is not complete, you can see that there was a considerable period of time where bad things were happening and the show continued. So there was clearly some breakdown, whether it was management or the artist management or the security or the command center. There was clearly some kind of breakdown that led to a devastating tragedy. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you know what? It's a big task, the training, and I wanted to share with you and see if you've got any
Mhm.
ideas how to do it. But I think Kitchener-Waterloo Oktoberfest had a great policy in that any meeting that was minuted, they had to include a safety talk. And the health and safety organizer at the time had a binder, and they even went to break it down into the different committees who might work with ladders or whatever. And it was just a 30-second to 1 minute process. And then everybody had to sign off. So from a due diligence point of view, it showed that, health
Mhm.
and safety was important. It was being documented, and it was something part of everyday culture. So I think the more you can get it into your everyday culture, the better off your program's going to be.
Absolutely. And Dave, that's a really terrific way to go about it. There are things that people are going to need to go, working at heights, you have to go and spend a day and get that training. But the safety talks, the toolbox talks, there's actually free resources about safety talks on the Infrastructure Health and Safety Association website, free, like a whole pack of them, ladders and electrical and PPE and all kinds of stuff. The more that you can ease those things into your conversations, the better it will be. And yeah, whenever you do your safety talks, you pass around a list and have people sign off that they attended. And that does, as you said, it builds your due diligence.
And I think with all the changes we've had and with the COVID planning and stuff, I mean, how to deal with difficult people is going to be important too, because as more and more things change, those difficult people come to the front of the line pretty quick
Yes.
and pretty loud. So
Yeah.
it's also something to think about down the
Oh,
line.
it is 100%. When it comes to those kinds of challenges, interpersonal conflict and that sort of thing, that's where you will really benefit from training your supervisors, rather than just saying, okay, you get a different t-shirt and a ball cap and now you're a supervisor. You need to provide them with the support to carry out those supervisory tasks, which will be problem solving and implementing and enforcing your health and safety program. So I think that's another area that's a good win.
Well, Janet, we really appreciate everything you do for us all the time. But thank you very much for this talk. You have some great points, some great contacts that you sent out to everybody. We really appreciate it, and good luck with all of your stuff you've got coming up. It looks like it's going to be a very busy time for you. Thanks again, Janet.
It's going to be busy and exciting, and all the best to all of you who are on this call. Take care.